Broadcasting across California, you're watching The Issue Is.
And welcome to The Issue Is. I'm Alex Michelson, and with us for the half hour, one of the most recognizable faces in all of politics. We're talking about Jen Psaki. Of course, she is currently the host of Inside with Jen Psaki, airing Sunday mornings and Monday evenings on MSNBC. Before that, she served as President Joe Biden's first White House press secretary, leading the country through the pandemic. She previously served Barack Obama in different roles, including as White House Communications Director. And she served as a spokesperson for the State Department, working for then Secretary of State John Kerry. She talks about all of that and more in her new book, Say More: Lessons from Work, the White House, and the World. Available now and already a New York Times bestseller. Congratulations on the book.
So much.
Jen Psaki, welcome to The Issue Is.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you.
Great to have you for the first time. So I love the book, read the whole thing, recommend it for people.
Thank you.
It's a great guide, not only to politics, but sort of being a successful communicator in life, which I think all of us could use help on. And I want to get into this in a moment.
Great.
But let's start with some of the news of the week. I know you saw the big New York Times Siena College poll this week that showed Joe Biden behind in most of the swing states. Real Clear Politics put out a map of all the recent averages of where the election would be if it was held today. Donald Trump winning with 312 electoral votes. How do you see the state of the race right now, and is Joe Biden behind?
I see the race is very close. This poll is not a poll that if you're sitting on the Biden campaign that you love to see. These are not great numbers. Concerning is the number of people who voted for him in 2020 who now are not saying they're with him. That's also an opportunity. They can probably get those people back. Concerning is also the number of people who see the economy as a top issue, who are not leaning toward him, despite all of the things that have happened. Concerning is also that 20% of people in that poll blame him for the Dobbs decision. Also an opportunity. This is going to be a very close election. There are some warning signs in there. I don't think the Biden campaign is unaware of them, but for people who thought this would be easy, it's not. It's
not going to be easy. And one thing that I think you've talked about some is this concept of strength versus weakness, right? And President Biden ran on this idea of competence. Let's be the adult in the room. And there are a lot of things that are sort of chaotic right now. We look at what's happening at the border, where there hasn't been a lot of control. We look at what's happening on college campuses. We look at what's happening in Israel with Gaza. In all of these situations, it seems like he isn't in control, or at least that's the perception by some people. How does he change that? Are you worried that he may be perceived as old and weak and not in control?
Well, I think the chaos is, to your point, something that people vote against, right? They vote against chaos, and that often means they want an alternative, a change, even though Trump was a very chaotic president. For the Biden team, there is a perception issue. On each of those issues, if you break them down, there is an explanation, but it is still undoubtedly a challenge because it's, if you're explaining, you're often losing because the public is like, I don't know about it, that, I feel chaotic.
You've talked about Trump's strategy is pretty clear, basically running against the system. He's got this situation where he's on trial, and he has got all these different people that want to be vice president showing up to the courtroom. What do you make of that whole thing that's going on as his communication strategy right now?
I mean, I don't even think, well, the benefit to Trump is that he has all of these people from his party doing what he can't do because it would violate the gag order, right? J.D. Vance, Mike Johnson, others, Vivek Ramaswamy, they are going out there and basically attacking the judge, the jury, the judge's daughter, the prosecutor. Trump can't do that, Michael Cohen. He can't do that. It would violate the gag order. So they're doing his dirty work for him. So in that sense, it's helpful to him. Their audience for their communication is Trump, which tells you how much he owns the Republican Party. There are exceptions to this, sure, but writ large, the fact that the Speaker of the House is going to New York to kiss the ring and go out there and attack people Trump can't attack tells you a whole lot.
Who do you think is leading the Veep stakes right now?
Oh, God, that requires me getting in Trump's brain.
Do it for us.
That's a hard thing. I think Tim Scott has a real shot. I think Trump will do it by people he can dominate, but he thinks will give him political value.
You do have an insight, though, about being a staffer. And you, as a staffer, you get to know the person you work for better than just about anybody. You spend more time with them. What do you make of the fact that when it comes to Trump, his vice president, his secretary of state, his secretary of defense, his chief of staff, his national security advisor all say, don't vote for him. And yet, that doesn't seem to be resonating. Why do you think that is?
It should be alarming to people when you have all of these national security officials, former prominent people who know him well, saying, don't vote for him, it's scary. But a lot of people don't know who they are, and it's like, it doesn't resonate to them. Now, I don't think it will never matter. It could be a very powerful ad if the Biden campaign took a bunch of these people, if they were willing to do it, and they may not be, and put them on air and made television ads. That might be powerful, but they may not be willing to do that.
We're talking to Jen Psaki, the author of Say More. And what's interesting about your book is it's not really just a memoir. It's really written as a how-to guide on how to better communicate in different aspects of your life. Why did you choose to do it that way?
When I left the White House, I thought a lot about things I wish I would have known when I was in my 20s and starting my career. And I'm sure you have many of these as well. Things that you learn along the way, mistakes you made, moments you wish you were more confident or believed more in your right to be in a room or in an anchor chair, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And I also thought a lot about the advice I would want to give my kids who are 8 and 6, so not quite yet, although my 8-year-old's very precocious and she's read like half the book.
What does your 8-year-old think of the book?
She really has searched through for references to herself.
Like everybody in Washington.
Right.
She's the reference person.
Right.
Yeah.
So she likes the photos. She's come with me to a couple of book events.
And you write about the fact that Barack Obama and other folks in the administration were very accepting of you creating boundaries to leave time for your daughter as well, which is really great.
Yeah. And I was very fortunate because President Obama, the entire White House, were very supportive. I left work at 5:30 nearly every day. I tried to leave on Fridays early, and it helped make it possible.
So you worked for 2 presidents and one guy who almost was president.
Correct.
One stayed away from being president, as John Kerry, I'm sure, would remind you.
Yes.
Ohio. So
he would say it exactly like that, Ohio.
Let's go through. I think it'd be interesting to talk about, compare and contrast the 3 of them, what it was like working for them. So let's start with John Kerry, who was the first person you worked for, Secretary of State. You also worked on his campaign. And you say what people think about him is really wrong.
Yeah.
How so?
Well, I worked for him twice. When I was a kid press secretary, as I say, press person on his presidential campaign, and then when I was the spokesperson at the State Department. And when I interviewed for the spokesperson at the State Department job, I came into that interview thinking, this is a guy who everybody thinks is aloof and unfriendly. He's completely the opposite. He is like a very smart and very experienced, but Labrador. I mean, he gave me a huge hug in my interview. He's a person, when we were traveling overseas, he would knock on your door and all the doors of the staff and say, let's go walk around, let's go to dinner. And I found him to be so tireless as a diplomat, but also a really wonderful human being to work for. And I don't think people saw that when he ran for president.
And then you work for Barack Obama, and you tell this story, which is just hilarious, about your sort of first meeting with him.
Yes.
And it was like something out of a slapstick comedy.
Yes. Well, he was already a larger-than-life figure. I mean, he'd given the best speech ever given at a convention. I think most people would say that.
2004.
In 2004. And I started to work for him in 2007. So the first time I met him was in October of 2007. The campaign sent me out to staff him, which means go with him to events in Ohio. And I was sitting in his car because they do that so that they're ready to go when the candidate gets off the plane. And I thought, oh my goodness, I better say something cool or interesting when he gets off the plane. And he got in the car and I said, you may be wondering who I am and why I'm in your car. And I was like, that was cool. You know, I did well there. And then I caught the handle of my bag somehow on the car door and spilled the contents of my bag onto his lap. I mean, you know, everything. Lipstick, tampons, makeup, whatever, notepads, probably a BlackBerry at the time, because that was the time. He was very graceful about it. But I think with him, and he's such a good example of this, because he was a great boss. I worked for him for 10 years, an amazing human being who thinks about things in a nuanced way, but so larger than life publicly that I was intimidated as a relatively younger staffer. And it took me a couple of years, and I talk about this journey in the book, to really feel comfortable not worrying that I was going to say something stupid or give him advice he didn't agree with or things like that.
Was President Biden less intimidating?
I was a little bit older.
Right.
I mean, I'd had 2 kids. You know, I own a house. Not that that matters. I was married. And I think I went into that job with just a little bit more confidence in my own skin, comfort in my own skin. And I knew that because I was going to be speaking on his behalf, I didn't work on the campaign. I had to develop a connection so that I could make him feel he could share things with me, or I could give him tough feedback. So it was expedited, but he's also somebody who is very relatable. I remember sitting down with him maybe a couple of weeks into my job and saying to him, which is a strange thing to say to the president, is this coming out of your mouth? You're like, should I be saying this? Where I said, I feel like I've known you a long time. And I said, I think that's a strange thing to say to a president, but I've already said it.
Well, yeah.
So,
and he had been on TV for 50 years.
Yes, he's been on TV a long time, but he is a very, you know, there's many times where I was in the Oval Office where his grandchildren would come in and he would do the things grandpas do, where he was like, you dropped something, and it was like a $20 bill, like he'd left on the floor. So I was more confident in my own skin, and that helped me connect with him faster.
What was the biggest difference between the three of them?
Oh, God. I think that President Obama, people think of him as an extrovert because he's such a tremendous speaker. But from what I saw, I think he's an introvert, which is not a bad thing. It just means you gain your energy from being alone and being thoughtful. President Biden is an extrovert. It's exhausting. I mean, when he was kind of tired of going on the road, we brought more members of Congress and elected officials with him because he just enjoyed the trips so much more. Right. And John Kerry, I think, is different because he's so optimistic and tireless in a way, and almost like unfettered by his years in Washington, which made him unique in that way.
It's always interesting. I remember watching when Obama and Biden would work a rope line together.
Oh, yeah.
How much Obama wanted to be done, and Joe Biden was way behind. Still talking to folks.
Connecting with people. It's just not the way he, but President Biden, yes, he could spend 3 hours on a rope line.
Yeah.
I think.
I want to ask you about one thing that's gotten some attention this week from the book, which was a story you told about President Biden looking at his watch after caskets had come back from Afghanistan. The story was not told completely accurately, which you've acknowledged. I know some of the folks, including some of the families of those soldiers who were upset by that. I just want to give you an opportunity to clarify what happened there.
Yeah, first, I mean, the larger story there, and the reason I included that story is because I wanted to convey a story about giving tough feedback to President Biden, which the context of that was telling him that when he shared stories about the loss of his own son, that wasn't resonating with these families who had experienced the worst day of their lives. So actually, my objective was to validate their experience and not the opposite. And as I've noted, it's a couple of lines in the book that we will change and will be taken out, the totality of it in the book. But my objective was actually to honor them and validate their experience, not the opposite.
Up next, Jen Psaki's surprisingly close relationship with Fox News. We are talking with Jen Psaki. Of course, as you were White House press secretary, the person you probably went back and forth with the most was Peter Doocy from Fox News. But here is what happened on your last day at the briefing.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. Sorry to see you go.
Are you?
Yes, and you've always been a good sport.
You know, I think Peter came into that room and his objective was to deliver on kind of the issues that his network was focused on that particular day. That was his job. There is often critical of the president, and I was working for the president. But I will say that he would come to see me after the briefing, and we would talk about issues off the record or on the record or on backgrounds. He was always professional. So we did have a combative back and forth in the briefing room, but we did have a very professional, good relationship otherwise.
You studied all the previous White House press secretaries. You watched video clips of them. You talked to many of them. I'm curious, when future White House press secretaries study you, what do you want them to remember about your time and to learn from you?
Oh, wow. I hope on my best days that I came with an argument, that I kept the tone civil, but I came with a rundown of facts in English. And what I mean by that is President Biden is allergic to acronyms and other things, as am I, right? And sometimes you go into it just because for a range of reasons. But my best days were when I could fight back an argument and talk about it in a way that people outside of Washington would understand.
That, and then now you've moved into this new role of being an anchor person.
Yes.
What's been the biggest surprise or maybe thing you didn't realize about what people on the other side were doing now that you're on the other side?
You know, you're very good at this, so this may just come naturally to you, but what I didn't realize is that conducting an interview, especially if it's with a newsmaker or an elected official, and you're trying to kind of make the conversation interesting, is much more work than answering the questions in a lot of ways.
I agree with that.
You know, you have
it is easier to be interviewed than to do an interview. It is easier to be interviewed
yes. because you should always be listening, right? Because otherwise you're not responding to the person you're talking to. I talk about that in the book. But when you're conducting an interview, one of my bosses, the many, said to me early on, nobody at home knows your plan. Meaning, if you know this well, right? I'm telling something, people watching you already know this. If you have a list of 10 questions and the fourth question is about North Korea, and you expect the person just to say, we don't have diplomatic relations and whatever, and they say something entirely different, you don't go on to the fifth question about healthcare. You keep talking about North Korea because it's interesting. So it's a conversation. So it doesn't necessarily surprise me, but that's the thing that's been an adjustment, or I didn't think about it through that perspective.
Right, like because we've got a whole list of stuff, and I haven't really followed it at all. So, which is great for the director to sit back and listening. Yeah, one of the people that you've talked to in your job as Inside with Jen Psaki is Governor Gavin Newsom.
I traveled with him to Alabama.
I know, and he promoted that heavily. What do you make of him? How does he compare to some of the other national figures that you've interviewed?
I interviewed him a couple times, but when I interviewed him in Alabama, he was engaging. You know, Alabama's not a blue state, it's safe to say. That's not easy.
The reddest there, it's as red as your hair.
It's quite a red state. And what was so interesting about his trip there is that, and he's done this other places, is that he went and he talked about things that were values for him in a way that was fearless of what people might say. I have spent a lot of time with a lot of people who are, I don't know if he'll run or not.
Want to be president.
But want to be president one day. There's a very exciting crop of people, I think, out there. I know this election is tough for people to digest, but there's a very exciting crop of people. He certainly is one of them.
As somebody who's spent time with president, does he have the presidential vibe to you?
I don't even know what that means. He is tall. That's good. Look, I think the presidential vibe, I would say, is authenticity and ability to connect, right? And all of the people I've worked for do that in different ways. But I am always surprised, you probably are too, by people running for president who don't know how to answer why they're running for president.
Yep, Ted Kennedy had that problem so many years ago, derailed his campaign.
Yes, and many since him, right?
Yeah.
And who don't think about what they actually think about big issues in the world, right? So to me, it's are you comfortable enough in your own skin to speak your own views and your own values and see if people agree with it? That's kind of an intangible, but you see it when you see it on the trail.
It is amazing because of that, whenever I'm interviewing a presidential candidate, my first question is always, why are you running for president?
Yes.
Which should be the biggest softball there is.
I know.
And yet oftentimes it isn't.
Right.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Yeah. When we come back, Psaki on balancing work and family. We're talking to Jen Psaki, the author of Say More. In here, you talk a lot about work-life balance, and I'm wondering if you can give your sort of main message to working moms and working dads who are, confused on how to, quote-unquote, have it all.
Well, it's impossible to have it all. You have to make choices. It means that when I was the White House press secretary, I tried to come home at 5 o'clock on Fridays to do pizza night with my kids and my sister and niece and nephew. It means that I also left at 6:45 in the morning for work, right? It meant that my kids got up at 5 in the morning. We defined our own parameters of what it looked like, and I think that has been a bit of a saving grace for me and my husband as we've kind of tried to balance 2 working parents and 2 kids and jobs and all of the things together.
Up next, Psaki plays personal issues. So we're going to wrap up our conversation with Jen Psaki with 2 games that we play here on the show.
I'm ready.
These are rapid-fire games. So the first one is called the name game.
Okay.
So this is, we're going to say names of people.
Is this like a pop culture test? Because you're going to make me nervous.
We're going to do that next.
Okay.
That's personal issues. This is the name game. These are all people you know.
Okay.
But the first word that comes to mind when you think of them. Okay. Here we go. Joe Biden.
Warm.
Jill Biden.
Smart.
Kamala Harris.
Charismatic.
Donald Trump.
Gross.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Worms.
Brainworm this week. Barack Obama.
Brilliant.
Michelle Obama.
Like fierce.
John Kerry.
Optimistic.
And finally, your co-host now at MSNBC, Rachel Maddow.
Genius.
All right, very nice. And now we end with, this is your pop culture favorite. So this isn't a test. This is just the first thing that comes to mind of your favorites to get to know you a little bit better.
Great.
Here we go. What is your favorite TV show?
Shogun is my current favorite.
Favorite movie?
Oh my God. I don't know. I'll have to come back to that.
Favorite musical artist?
We're T-Swift people in my house.
All right.
My daughter has really influenced me, but I do love her.
Favorite book?
A Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius is one of my old school favorites.
I love it. And who is your role model?
Oh my God. Wait, does that bell bad?
No, you can keep going.
When I was starting my job now that I have, I did look to people like George Stephanopoulos on how he conducts himself in interviews. He transitioned in a different time where there wasn't social media and things along those lines. But having worked on the other side, what I admired so much about him was that he always makes news in interviews, but he does it in like a calm and respectful way. And I thought that's such a good model.
That's really, that is a good model. And since you brought up Taylor Swift, favorite Taylor Swift song?
I do like to listen to Bejeweled a lot in my car. I think that's still a good one.
Katie Porter was on. She said the same one.
She did?
Yes.
I mean, I do want to drive around in a car with Katie Porter with a whiteboard. I just think it would be fun. It's for another day.
The minivan blasting Bejeweled. Well, I have Life in the Fast Lane ready for you because I feel like that's what you've been living for a while.
I love
even
Tom
in the
Petty, too.
intro.
I got to throw him in there. May he rest in peace.
Jen Psaki, again, the book for the 50th time is called Say More, Lessons from Work, the White House, and the World. What a pleasure it's been talking with you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate it. We'll see you next week for more of The Issue Is.